Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 17, Alleged Sources of Kabalistic Doctrine, Book 3, Source and Authority of the Kabalah, from the Doctrine and Literature of the Kabalah by Arthur Edward Waite. 5. Alleged Sources of Kabalistic Doctrine. We are now able to reach a specific conclusion with regard to our subject and to affirm that many of the materials collected in the Zohar are earlier than the period of their promulgation. We cannot say whether the Sefer Yetzirah is much anterior to the 9th century, but both works are in connection with Talmudic times, and within the limits of the Christian centuries there seems therefore to have been an esoteric tradition in Israel. Whether it existed prior to Christianity itself is the next concern of our inquiry. At this point, the difficulties begin to multiply because the range of research is exceedingly large, and it has been covered in every direction by successive generations of hardy speculators. We must proceed step by step and shall do well to begin first of all by a general survey of the subject. The doctrine of the Kabalah has been referred for its origin to almost every philosophic and religious system of antiquity, and its points of correspondence with each have been carefully tabulated. It has been shown to be derived from Akkadiya, from India, from China, from ancient Egypt, from Platonism and Neoplatonism, from the categories of Aristotle, from early Christian Gnosticism. The most philosophical conclusion which can, I think, be drawn from all this rival evidence is that it is not derived from any one of them specifically and exclusively, but rather that the human mind, when engaged on certain fundamental and perhaps insoluble problems of the universe, tends independently to reach conclusions that are similar and may even wear sometimes an aspect of literal identity. That the Kabalah is largely an outcome of such unaided research, that its results are in the main sui generis, but that they offer points of contact with other attempts of the kind in all ages and nations. We must, of course, distinguish the fundamental part of the Kabalah from its developments. Included in the first class are the doctrine of the 10 emanations, that of Ein Sof, of the macroprosopus and the microprosopus, some of which may go far back in the history of post-Christian Jewish literature, indeed almost to Talmudic times. The subsequent developments possess a complexion derived from many sources, not excluding the scholastic philosophy of Christian Europe during the Middle Ages. Ein Sof is that final concept of the deity which is reached by all metaphysics. It is not necessary to suppose that it was derived from Babylonian initiations during the exile of 70 years, or from Greek speculation at Alexandria. It may be regarded more reasonably as a product of the unfinished exile of the Christian centuries, but in either case it is the ultimate point of theosophic speculation possible to the human mind, at which the mind always arrives. The doctrine of the Sephiroth is, in its turn, a very intelligible form of another widespread device of the world-est thought when it seeks to bridge the gulf between finite and infinite, between absolute purity and that material world which in one or other way seems always to be regarded as unclean. The macroprosopons and the microprosopus, whether late or early in Jewish literature, are late at least in the history of human speculation. They are an attempt to distinguish between God as he is in himself and in his relation with his children. As might be expected, they are the most characteristic of Jewry, and as such offer the least connection with any external system, yet they have some points of contact. As regards each and all, the first point to be fixed firmly in the mind is that they are the natural results of legitimate intellectual inquiry. Given the times and the circumstances, they are the kind of speculative doctrine which one might have expected a priori. When we remember the persistence of tradition which has always characterized the most persistent of all races, when we remember that the Jew of the Christian dispensation may be said to have lived in the remembrance of his glory passed away, we can well believe that he was encompassed by an atmosphere of legend on which his fervid mind was at work continually, out of which he never stepped, and it would be unreasonable to suppose that all his literature, like all his thought, was not profoundly tinctured by this, his intellectual environment. But it is a wide and an unwarrantable step from the belief in such a natural and inevitable operation to a belief that Jewish tradition must or may be referred to any distinctive source in the past from which it was perpetuated by some conventional initiation, as occult writers suppose, and some others also who have no such bias towards the mysterious to intervene in apology for their opinion. We have no ground for affirming with Basnage that Old Egypt is the true nursery of the Kabalah, though it is quite possible that Israel brought something from the Nile Valley which does not appear in the Pentateuch. Nor are we justified in agreeing with the illustrious Grand Master of the ancient and accepted rite of Freemasonry, United States Southern Jurisdiction, when he suggests a direct communication of doctrine from the religion of Zoroaster to Kabbalism, which must be referred to the period of the exile. That the Jews derived something from Babylon I have already noted, and amidst their checkered experience under Persian domination after their final scattering, possibly the great body of Haggadah may have received increment and coloring. More fantastic theorists have imagined that not only is there a Chinese Kabalah, but that it is the source of that which was in Israel. That the great unknown empire, in which all things from alchemy to the art of printing seem to have germinated, possessed, and still possesses a vast body of traditional lore of so-called secret teaching, is mere commonplace on which there is no call to insist. And if occultists will be so unphilosophical as to term this Kabalah, there is as little need to dispute with them about the improper and confusing use of a mere word. That the book called Yi King, or Mutation, contains an esoteric religious tradition which has, as it is said, some analogies with Kabbalistic doctrine, is neither surprising nor significant of anything except the irresistible tendency of the human mind to reflect after much the same manner in all lands and times upon mysteries that are everywhere the same, ever urgent, ever recurring. Such analogies do not prove, as occultists would have us believe, the existence of a wisdom religion, which, if they will suffer the interpretation, may be presumed to mean the secret science of the reintegration of the soul in God accumulated through the ages of initiation. In the natural order, the truly fundamental religion is the common ground of all, which stands in need of no formal perpetuation, as it is inborn in the heart and mind of humanity. And yet the undoubted existence of the Mongolian race in Mesopotamia, almost at the dawn of history, may suggest that the Semite drew something from Mongolian Chaldea, even in the days of Abraham, as afterwards the Jew of Babylon may have had a certain contact with Confucianism in its earliest form. We may admit readily and reasonably that the Jew received everywhere and always retained the reception, provided that we leave him everywhere his own intellectual initiative and bear in mind that the process was everywhere natural and informal, not arbitrary and conventional. Passing over the regions of wild surmise in which Odin, the Norse god, becomes identified with the Kabbalistic Abba, Freya with Aima, Thor with Arik Anpin, the lesser countenance and the supreme being discerned behind the northern mythology with Ein Sof, passing over also certain druidic correspondences into which it might be unwise to enter, we may take much the same view as before regarding the alleged Gnostic connections of the Kabalah. We may concur cordially with King when he argues that whatever the date of the Zohar in its present form, its principles and traditions are similar to those taught in the schools of Babylon and Tiberias. They are the same, and they are also different. And the difference represents the growth of the intellectual thought of Israel, its proper native development under the various impulsions which it received between the period of Gnosticism and the period of the promulgation of the Zohar. We may acknowledge also that Marcus, as a born Jew, devised something of the national heritage to the system which he produced. Yet Gnosticism is not Kabbalism, though there are striking analogies between them, and something of common source is attributable to both. Monsieur Amelino is nearer the truth when he speaks of a coincident development of the two systems. There are analogies in nature and appearance between glass and rock crystal, but glass is glass and a pebble is a pebble. It is unphilosophical because unneedful to go far back and far off when the explanation of given facts lies near in time and place. That is best which lies the nearest, says the poet, and artists or occultists, makers of verse or Kabbalistic commentators, we should shape our work of art or interpretation without drawing needlessly from things remote. The prototype of Yetziratic and Zoharic theosophy is close to our hand in Jewry. The fusion of all systems, which is a characteristic of the present day, has its parallel in that epoch of the past which witnessed the rise of Christianity. At the time when John the Baptist made his appearance in the desert, near the shores of the Dead Sea, all the old philosophical and religious systems were approximating toward each other. A general lassitude inclined the minds of all toward the quietude of that amalgamation of doctrines for which the expeditions of Alexander and the more peaceful occurrences that followed, with the establishment in Asia and Africa of many Grecian colonies, had prepared the way. After the intermingling of different nations which resulted from the wars of Alexander in 3/4 of the globe, the doctrines of Greece, of Egypt, of Persia, and of India met and intermingled everywhere. All the barriers that had formerly kept the nations apart were thrown down, and while the people of the West readily connected their faith with those of the East, the latter hastened to learn the traditions of Rome and Athens. The Jews and Egyptians, then the most exclusive of all peoples, yielded to that eclecticism which prevailed among their masters, the Greeks and Romans. National ambition, however, rather than eclecticism, influenced the Jews, and though it was impossible, having regard to their environment, that they should not be largely tinctured, it was their object to tinge other systems and not to modify their own, to show that the ethnic philosophers owed everything to the divine doctrine of Palestine. Philo, the Greek of Alexandria, to some extent Hellenized the Hebrew religion that he might the better Judaize the philosophy of Hellas. From this fusion there arose the nearest approach, if not in time and place, at least in form and subject, to Kabbalistic theosophy as regards its source in Jewry. There is no need in this elementary study to refer to Aristobulus, who a century before had received a similar vocation. Philo and the movement and mode of thought which he represents cannot reasonably have been without an effect upon the literature of later ages in Jewry. Though the history of that influence and the mode of its transmission cannot be traced conclusively, we must not, however, fall into the error of supposing that the Kabalah is Platonism derived through Philo and the Jewish school of Alexandria, or that it is Jewish tradition modified by Philoism. When we find in the Sefer Yetzirah the alphabetical symbols of the Logos made use of by God in the formation of the universe, it is very easy to set it down to Greek influence, but the fact remains that the book of formation is essentially and characteristically Hebrew, and this fact lifts it altogether out of the category of Platonic succession. Yet we know where to look for the explanation of its points of contact. As regards the doctrine developed by the commentators on the Sefer Yetzirah prior to the appearance of the Zohar, as regards the literature which makes contact with these, and as regards the Zohar itself, saying nothing of the later literature which had recourse consciously and openly to Greek sources, the case is much stronger. Philo insists on the antithesis between God and the material world, the infinite and the finite. So, let us say, does the Zohar, which may be taken to stand for the whole literature. Philo affirms the absolute transcendency of God, so does Zoharic doctrine. Philo regards the divine nature as in itself escaping definition and in itself without quality. Kabbalism denounces those who would attempt to describe God as he is in himself, even by the attributes which he manifests. Philo's descriptions of God are all negative. Compare the latens deltas of the Kabalah. Philo says that no name can be given him. All Kabbalism agrees. Philo regards the scriptural deity as anthropomorphic and allegorizes upon all the descriptions, attributions, and manifestations of deity therein. Compare the doctrine of the two countenances, designed to explain the same anthropomorphisms. Philo regards the letter of Scripture as a veil, so does the Zohar. Philo interprets it literally or mystically according to his purpose. So does Kabbalistic exegesis. Philo regards the visible world as the gate of the world unseen. He believes in the possibility of an immediate contemplation of God, in the existence of an archetypal world, that things seen are a counterpart of things unseen, in all of which we are enumerating express points of Kabbalistic doctrine. These analogies are too numerous, too close, too consecutive, to leave any room for doubt that the heads of Kabbalistic teaching pre-existed in Jewry, and we have further the explicit testimony of Philo as to the existence of a mystic doctrine in Jewry. Spontaneity, initiation, subsequent influences all remain unimpeded and are all necessary to explain the existence of the Zohar and its connections, but its source is not indeed Philo of necessity, much less Philo exclusively, but that which produced Philo. But more than all, it is hardy, independent speculation, wearing tradition like a veil which does not conceal its essential individuality, and much nearer to ourselves at times in its spirit than we should ever suspect from its form. Yet we may suspect it on philosophical grounds, for however concealed behind the veil of symbolism, however much distorted in strange glasses of vision, the sentiments and aspirations of humanity have ever a common ground. And through the vehicle of Kabbalistic apparatus, under many covers, and tinctured by many fantastic colourings of art and artifice, we see that our own yearnings and longings find expression after their own manner in this book of the words of the exile. We acknowledge with the poet how truly all the lore and the legend is a part of the hunger and thirst of the heart, the frenzy and fire of the brain, which yearns for the fruitage forbidden, the golden pomegranates of Eden, to quiet its fever and pain. When the faithful shepherd of the Zohar puts these words into the mouth of the Father of universal Israel, "In this world my name is written YHVH and read Adonai. But in the world to come the same will be read as it is written, so that mercy shall be from all sides." We see that at the beginning of the 20th century we might have expressed differently the longing, the hope, the faith for which this symbol stands, but it is still that which we all desire to express. And furthermore, I do not know that our modern terms could have represented it better. Herein is the justification of the ways of God to man, and herein the pious conviction of the believing heart that in the great day of the Lord there shall be no scandal to his children, that in spite of the darkness of our ways we have held rightly that he is light, that though we write mercy in our hearts but read law and its inflexible order in all around us, we shall one day know that it is mercy on every side, the highest expression of the law, or that law is that order under which the divine charity is manifested. It is in messages like this that the abiding beauty and significance of the Kabalah are contained, not in the beard of Microprosopus or in the number of worlds suspended from the hair on the cranium of Arik Anpin. Gematria and metathesis may be pastimes fit only for children, but the voice of the rabbis of the Zohar expressing the language of the heart of Israel needs no Temura to expound its meaning, and it is by the ring of such utterances that the true believer of today is made conscious electrically that the holy synods were composed of men who are our brethren. As this view disposes implicitly of the claim to a divine authorship and places the theory of aboriginal tradition among fables, so also it forbids us to suppose that Kabbalistic doctrines are the work of any single mind. One feels instinctively, without any necessity of evidence, that these things are not and cannot be the unaided work of Moses de Leon. They are a growth and a result. As, however, the Zohar assumed its present shape at a late period, admittedly, it may credibly have taken part of it at the hands of this Spanish Jew. That his other works are inferior is no argument. Cervantes wrote many worthless romances before and after the sum of all chivalry. The Galatea did not make Don Quixote impossible. So also Beroald de Verville wrote books on alchemy which are despised even by alchemists. But he wrote also the Moyenne de Parvenir. Every magnum opus is antecedently improbable, and the intellectual distance between the sorrows of Werther and the second part of Faust is like the void between Ein Sof and Malkuth, which it was the purpose of the Sephiroth to fill. But if all masterpieces are antecedently improbable, it is true also that they are impossible without antecedents. There are certain dull old histories known to literati which were necessary to the plays of Shakespeare. So the formulation of the Zohar must have been preceded by much raw material, both oral and written, parts of which were no doubt incorporated without any change in their formulation. For example, the Book of Occultation bears all the marks of antiquity, no less considerable than that of the Book of Formation. There is, of course, a point beyond which the reasonable critic will not pass. So far as it goes, we are on safe ground with the meager testimony of St. Agabad. With R. Simeon ben Yochai, we are on purely traditional ground, and it is not to be supposed for a moment that more authenticity resides in the dramatis persona of the Holy Synod than in those of the Turba Philosophorum. I do not mean that such names are entirely pretexts, for they may possess an honest basis in legend, but they are not literal or historical. They occupy a middle position between the script of a shorthand reporter and imaginary conversations like those of W.S. Landor. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.